I'm Megan Hartley, 28. Newly moved to Denver and still learning the sound of this apartment at night when everything goes quiet. That quiet broke when my phone lit up with my dad's name and his voice came in so thin it barely sounded like him. "Don't hang up," he whispered as I sat up. And behind him, my mom's words pushed through in sharp, frantic bursts I recognized from every moment she didn't want a truth to land. Then Dad said, "Your sister says the bank can take the house." And the way he stumbled on the word bank made my stomach tighten before anything else did. I told him to put me on speaker. And he breathed like he was steadying himself before the phone clicked, and my mom's voice rushed forward saying, "You're confusing him again." "Megan," Dad tried to speak over her, saying, "Your sister has papers. She won't let me read them." And each word came out like he was walking uphill in the dark. Outside my window, a leftover firework cracked somewhere down the block, and the sharp pop folded into the moment exactly the way fear sometimes does. Then he said, "They're coming tomorrow to change the locks." And the room around me felt smaller, as if the threat had traveled states just to sit beside me. I forced my voice into something steady and told him, "Don't sign another page." "Not one." But he swallowed hard and said, "I don't know what I already signed." My mom tried to cut in again with, "She left. Thomas." She left, pulling the blame toward me as if distance erased what was happening. Dad said, "Your sister says this is your fault, that if you hadn't moved, we wouldn't be behind." And I could hear the shame he didn't deserve slip into the edges of his words. I closed my hand around the phone and said, "Dad, listen to me." Because the house I grew up in was suddenly in someone else's hands, and I needed him to hear what his own voice was already telling me. When the call with my parents cut off, I dialed my Aunt Diane, and the moment she answered, she said, "I was waiting for you to call me back." I told her what Dad had just said, and she exhaled sharply before adding, "Megan." There was a yellow envelope on their counter last week with a window showing the line, "Notice of Default." Hearing those words made my chest tighten because Rebecca had never mentioned anything close to a default. Diane lowered her voice as if the evidence was still in her hands and said, "Your mother signed for it. The date was 3 weeks ago." I asked her what else she saw, and she said, "A folder on the counter labeled POA, Property Transfer, Hartley Residence." And it wasn't tucked away like something harmless. Her voice didn't shake, but the way she emphasized each title told me she already understood more than she wanted to. I told her Rebecca claimed everything was routine, and Diane answered, "Routine doesn't come with certified mail and 3-week-old notices." The words settled between us with the same weight as that stamped date she'd just mentioned. I asked if she remembered anything else, and she said, "Yes." A sticky note on the fridge with Rebecca's handwriting saying, "Locksmith, 9 a.m. Tuesday." The time and date were too precise to be a misunderstanding, and Diane didn't try to soften it when she repeated them. I felt the truth tightening as she said, "She's preparing them for something they don't understand." I told her I needed pictures of everything she'd mentioned, and she simply said, "I'll go back tonight," the certainty in her voice matching each detail she'd just laid out. The morning after Diane described the envelope and the folder, my phone buzzed at 7 a.m. with a message from my mom saying, "Don't come this year. We're keeping it small." I stood in my kitchen feeling the chill from the open window as I read it again. And before I could reply, another message from her followed with nothing but the words, "It's better this way." I typed back, "You said everyone was coming." And the dots appeared for a moment before fading as though she'd reconsidered responding. A minute later, she wrote, "This year is about your sister. Don't ruin it." And the finality in her phrasing matched the same sharp tone I'd heard behind my dad's voice the night before. I hadn't finished absorbing those messages when my screen lit up again. And this time, it was Rebecca saying, "Guest list is final. Megan." The sentence held the same clipped calm she used when she wanted a situation settled long before anyone else had agreed to it. I read the words twice, noticing there wasn't a greeting. Not even a period. Just a statement made to close a door. I responded with nothing because arguing with a line written that cleanly would only sharpen the edge she'd already chosen. My kitchen was still quiet when I set the phone down, and the silence carried the weight of each timestamp. One following another as if they had been coordinated. My mom didn't call to soften it, and Rebecca didn't follow up to explain whether something had changed in the family plans. Instead, the messages sat in a stack on my screen like a small archive of decisions made without me. I stared at them long enough to feel the pattern settle, and the only thing I could do in that moment was let the meaning land exactly the way it had been delivered. When my inbox chimed that afternoon, the subject line read, "Final relocation package attached." And I opened it knowing the timing wasn't accidental. I whispered to myself, "I'll take it," as though saying it quietly would keep the decision from sounding like a reaction to the messages that morning. The HR coordinator followed with a short note explaining the Denver timeline. And seeing the date written so cleanly made the choice settle faster than I expected. I replied, "I accept." And the confirmation came back before I'd even closed the laptop. I packed that night with the kind of focus people mistake for calm. And as I folded a sweater, I said out loud, "2 suitcases are enough." The winter coat went in next, followed by the framed photo of the 4 of us wearing those matching sweaters my mom insisted on years ago. I didn't linger on the picture because the silence in my apartment already carried the meaning of those texts more clearly than the smiles in the frame ever had. By the time I zipped the second suitcase, the room felt lighter in a way that didn't require understanding to feel true. I left before sunrise without announcing anything, and the road out of town looked the same as it always had, even though it no longer held a place for me at the end of it. I said, "This is fine." Not because I believed it fully, but because the empty passenger seat made it easier to say it without interruption. The miles carried me west while my phone stayed quiet, holding only the messages that had pushed me toward this move in the first place. When the state line came and went, I didn't mark it aloud. The choice had been made hours earlier when Denver became the only place that hadn't told me to stay away. That evening, Diane called me again and began with, "I went back to the house like I said I would." Her voice steady in a way that told me she had found more than she wanted to. She said, "The yellow envelope is still there. Same logo. Same date. And your mother's signature on the certified slip." I pressed the phone closer as she added, "There's also a folder left out now, labeled POA, Property Transfer, Hartley Residence in bold print." The wording matched exactly what she'd mentioned earlier, and hearing it repeated with each title clearly spoken made the picture sharpen fast. I asked what else she could see without anyone noticing, and Diane said, "There's a stack of papers inside that folder. Color tabs sticking out like someone was preparing a sequence." She didn't soften the next words when she added, "One of the tabs says deed, and another says authorization, and neither looked like drafts." I stayed silent long enough for her to continue. It wasn't tucked away. It was placed right beside the kitchen phone like they were expecting to pick up where they left off. Every phrase she used lined up with the items she'd already described, forming a trail that didn't bend in any harmless direction. Before I could ask anything else, Diane said, "There's a sticky note on the fridge, too. The same handwriting as before, saying, 'Locksmith, 9 a.m. Tuesday.' And the ink hasn't smudged." The precision of the time matched exactly what she told me earlier, reinforcing that none of this was a misunderstanding. I told her I needed photos of everything, and she answered, "I took them already. Megan, they're clear enough to show every label and date." She paused only long enough to breathe before saying, "You'll have them tonight." her certainty fitting every piece of evidence she had just put into words. When I called my dad back, he answered with, "Rebecca's here now, and she says she'll explain everything," the strain in his voice slipping through every syllable. Before I could respond, Rebecca's voice came in as steady as a customer service script, saying, "Dad doesn't need to panic. Megan." I streamlined the paperwork so bills wouldn't pile up. I said, "Then let him read what he signed." And Rebecca replied, "He already agreed. And it was routine. So there's nothing else to review." My dad tried to add, "She said it would make things easier." But the uncertainty in his tone didn't match the confidence in hers. I kept my voice even and said, "Rebecca, did you use the POA to open a HELOC and the silence that followed was longer than any denial she could have offered?" My mom's voice chimed in with, "You're upsetting your father again." But I stayed focused as I said, "There are missed payments." And the bank confirmed they weren't his. Rebecca finally answered, "I only opened what was necessary. Someone had to manage the bills when you chose to move." My dad repeated, "I didn't open anything," sounding more certain now that her phrasing didn't match his memory. I told him, "Dad, the POA gives her authority to act as you. And that's why I need to know exactly what she's done." Rebecca cut in with, "Stop dramatizing this. I handled it because no one else stepped up." Her tone tightening the more I named what she'd used. My mom said softly, "Your sister has been under pressure." As if pressure explained certified mail and skipped explanations. I answered, "Pressure doesn't hide notices or schedule a locksmith." And the words landed without room for her to reshape them. My dad whispered, "What locksmith?" and the tremor in that question carried all the confusion he'd been swallowing. I said, "The note on the fridge says 9 a.m. Tuesday." And Rebecca jumped in quickly with, "That was a precaution. Nothing more," my mom murmured. "Your father needs stability." But this time he didn't retreat behind her words. He said, "I want to know what I signed." And the steadiness in his voice formed the first boundary I had heard from him in years. The next morning, Diane kept me on the line as she walked my dad into the bank. And I heard him tell the employee, "I need a printout of every account under my name." The banker replied, "Of course, Mr. Hartley, but I'll need to verify your ID first." Her voice carrying the same measured tone through the phone. After a few clicks, she said, "I'm seeing an active home equity line of credit tied to your property." And my dad answered, "I didn't open any line of credit." Diane stayed silent long enough for the banker to add, "The records show it was opened using a power of attorney document." I steadied my voice and said, "Can you confirm the agent listed on that POA?" And the banker replied, "It names Rebecca Hartley as the authorized representative." My dad breathed out a sound that held disbelief and recognition at the same time before saying, "She told us signing would help pay bills." The banker continued, "2 payments on the HELOC have been missed, which is why the notice of default was issued." Diane repeated softly, "Missed payments," as though aligning the bank's statement with the envelope she'd seen. I asked Dad, "Did you authorize any withdrawals?" And he said, "No. Megan, I didn't touch anything. She handled it all." The banker spoke again. "This account shows multiple transactions coded under the agent's login credentials, each word landing with the exactness of someone reading directly from the screen." Diane didn't interrupt when the printer began feeding papers out, letting the sound fill the space before the banker said, "These are your transaction histories and a copy of the POA we have on file." My dad murmured, "That signature looks like mine. But I never saw the rest of these pages." I told him, "We're not arguing about memory. We're clarifying what actually happened." And the banker added, "You have the right to revoke this POA at any time." "Mr. Hartley," my dad said, "I want it revoked today." and the firmness in his voice didn't need my help to stand. Diane answered for both of us. "Then we'll take the paperwork." And the banker replied, "I'll prepare it now," her words matching every detail she had already confirmed. Diane called me again once they reached the attorney's office. And she said, "We're sitting with Mark Ellison now. Megan. And he's looking over the bank paperwork." I heard him say, "Mr. Hartley, a power of attorney can be revoked immediately as long as you're competent and willing." The tone firm enough to stand without sounding harsh. My dad answered, "I'm willing. I didn't know she opened anything." And Ellison replied, "Then we'll prepare a revocation and notify the bank today." Diane repeated, "Today. The way someone does when the timing matters as much as the action." Ellison continued, "You also have the right to request a full accounting of every transaction performed under that POA." And my dad said, "I want to see everything she did." The attorney added, "We'll document the request properly, so the bank is required to comply," grounding each word in the paperwork they had already gathered. I said, "Don't let anything move forward without him present." And Ellison responded, "That will be included in the restrictions of the revocation." My dad let out a slow breath before saying, "I should have read what she put in front of me." Ellison didn't shift tone when he said, "Most misuse happens because people trust the wrong signatures at the wrong moment." And the way he emphasized signatures tied directly back to the pages the banker had printed. Diane said, "He's ready to sign the revocation." And Ellison answered, "Good. Once it's notarized, the bank must freeze her authority immediately." My dad said, "Let's do it." The steadiness in his voice clearer than it had been since the first call. Diane confirmed, "He's signing now," grounding the moment in the same certainty carried by every document they had reviewed. When they reached the attorney's office, Diane kept the call open long enough for me to hear the papers being set down and Ellison beginning with, "Your father can revoke that power of attorney immediately, as long as he understands what he's doing." My dad answered with a quiet, "I do understand. And I want it revoked." And Ellison responded, "Then we'll prepare the documents now and notify the bank before close of business." The steadiness in my dad's voice carried more weight than it had in days. Even with the strain underneath it, I asked if the bank would honor the revocation right away. And Ellison replied that they were obligated to, once it was notarized. Ellison went on, "You're also entitled to a full accounting for every transaction made under that POA." And my dad told him, "I want to see every withdrawal and every signature she used." The attorney confirmed the request would be formalized so the bank couldn't delay or narrow what they provided. And Diane mentioned the banker had already printed the POA kept on file. I reminded them not to authorize anything else without my dad present. And Ellison assured me it would be written directly into the restrictions. My dad murmured something about not realizing what those papers contained. But Ellison kept the focus on the steps ahead. Ellison explained the last portion. "Once you sign this revocation and it's witnessed properly, her authority stops today." And the certainty in his tone aligned cleanly with each document spread in front of them. My dad said he was ready. And the pen touched the page with a finality that didn't require narration. Diane confirmed the notary had validated everything. And Ellison stated the bank would receive the revocation packet within the hour. Hearing that timeline land exactly beside the evidence we already had made the moment feel solid in a way no explanation from Rebecca ever had. The mediation room felt stripped of anything that could soften what needed to be said. And the mediator began with, "We're here to finalize responsibility for the withdrawals and the attempted deed transfer." Rebecca answered before anyone else, insisting, "I kept the household afloat when no one else stepped in." While my father told her, "You kept us in the dark and pushed papers we never understood." I added that the bank's packet left no room for interpretation, And the mediator slid the folder toward her with a quiet, neutral gesture. She stared at it without opening it, as if touching the truth might confirm how far she'd gone. I told her, "The dates on the withdrawals line up with the contractors you brought in." And my father followed with, "I never gave permission for a single change." Rebecca muttered that the work had been necessary, but the mediator asked whether my father had authorized the spending at all. Her silence answered for her, and the weight of it pressed through the room more clearly than any accusation. I pointed out the unsigned estimate buried in the documentation, and Ellison confirmed the bank had already flagged the inconsistency. Rebecca finally placed her hand on the folder and said, "I wasn't trying to take anything from you." But my father replied, "You didn't have to take it to damage us." She whispered that she'd been drowning and didn't know how to ask for help. And I reminded her that she had chosen control over honesty every step of the way. The mediator explained the repayment plan prepared by Ellison and asked if she accepted the terms. She nodded slowly, and the mediator recorded it without expression. The room settled into a steadier rhythm as the agreement locked her access closed. Ellison raised the unrecorded deed and said, "This document may not be filed, but presenting it to them without disclosure is a serious breach." My father answered, "It won't happen again." And Rebecca whispered that she understood the boundary now. The mediator guided her through signing the acknowledgement that she relinquished all financial authority and property claims, and her signature hit the page with no request for clarification. My father's breath eased when the final sheet was collected, and the mediator closed the session with a brief confirmation that the matter was resolved under binding terms. The truth didn't undo the damage, but it finally placed every decision back in the hands they belonged. The house felt different the next morning when my dad told me, "I'm keeping every document in a separate folder from now on," and he rested his hand on it as if anchoring a promise. Rebecca sat across from us and said she would follow the repayment plan without any reminders, and her voice didn't carry the edge it once did. My mother added that she wanted things to be honest from here forward, and the quiet between them finally felt like a beginning rather than a shield. I told them I wasn't moving back, but I was staying in their lives with rules that protected all of us. Diane stepped into the doorway and said she'd check in weekly until everything stabilized. And my dad answered that he appreciated someone watching his blind spots. Rebecca murmured that she understood why those boundaries had to stay in place. And there was no argument waiting behind her words this time. My mom asked if holidays could be smaller and steadier from now on, and my dad agreed before I had to shape the thought myself. I told them I'd come when the invitation matched the truth, and nothing in the room tightened against it. When I packed to return to Colorado, my dad walked me out and said he was proud of how I held the line, and the steadiness in his voice matched the steps we had taken. My mom hugged me with a softness uncluttered by expectations, and Rebecca remained inside, finishing the paperwork that finally returned control where it belonged. Diane called after me that she'd send updates as needed, and I told her I trusted her judgment without hesitation. Driving away, I felt the distance settle into something solid rather than lonely. Shaped by a boundary that didn't divide us, it kept us whole in a way we had never managed before. When I reached home, the quiet felt earned, shaped by everything we had just rebuilt. I told myself that healing could start in small, steady steps, and it didn't need permission to continue. If this story stayed with you, I hope you'll remain here with me for the next one. Thank you for listening and for sharing this space.